Hey everybody, welcome over to my YouTube channel. Thanks for coming over here from TikTok. I am going to tell you the story of Professor Driscoll today. So we pick up Professor Driscoll's story in 1898, and we pick it up just after his first suicide attempt. So he was a professor of stenography. He met his wife in about 1888 and they got married. They actually met in Atlanta, Georgia. His wife was actually from way up north. And came from a fairly affluent family. I don't know why she was in Atlanta. I'm not sure why Professor Driscoll was in Atlanta, but I know that they met, fell in love, and got married. Now, they lived in Atlanta for a while after they became married, and then moved down here to Nashville, and they moved for business reasons. Now, Professor Driscoll, in his interviews later in life, does say that, in fact, he had been a fairly wealthy man when he met her. Okay, so when the Driscolls moved here from Atlanta, unfortunately Mrs. Driscoll had an accident and it messed up her hip. And it messed up her hip to a point where she was in bed for days at a time. So they lived down in the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce building and actually had a little series of apartments there. Professor Driscoll endeavored to be a good husband and a good provider, and he set up a shop, a school for stenographers, with a Professor Jennings. Now, he had done this after he had saved for a couple of years and had worked for someone else for what he felt was really low pay and not enough for him. He set that up. He had faith that Professor Jennings actually knew what he was doing business-wise. It comes to light about the time, really just before we pick up with this story, that Professor Jennings is no better with money than Professor Driscoll. So that being said, Professor Driscoll has lost all of his money. His wife is at home and she is ill. He feels like he has done all that he can do, falls into a bit of a depression, and he's not confiding in his wife, and life is moving on, and money, more and more money is going out and less money is coming in. He, because of his depression, doesn't show up for all of his classes, so he ends up with fewer and fewer students, which just continues to make this problem roll and become worse and worse and worse. And at some point in his mind, he believes that the world would be better off and his wife would be better off if he just wasn't around anymore. Now, we all know that that is a depression symptom, and today we would be able to help him with talk therapy and with medication, but back in 1898 they just didn't have that, guys. It just wasn't an option. So he just falls deeper and deeper and deeper into this, and he really begins to think that, you know, the world would just be so much better off if he wasn't around, and things would just go so much easier. And well, if he was gone, well, then his wife, there wouldn't be a spot for her because she's not really able to work, and she is bedridden for days on end because of her hip injury. And so he decides for her that she too needs to pass. Well, he has tried in the past to get her to take morphine, because you used to be able to get morphine from the pharmacist just on the basis of your word. So he decides that he needs to get some morphine, and he knows that this is also an effective way where you just go to sleep and you pass away. And so one night he goes to work. On his way home, he stops at the pharmacy. He stops at the pharmacy. He talks to the pharmacist. He gets himself some morphine. He picks up enough, and they used to call it in grains. I don't know how much a grain was, but he picks up probably around 30 to 40 grains. And he comes home. He doesn't tell her what he's giving her. He tells her, I think it was probably something like quinine, which would have been something different, okay? It's a much less deadly drug. You can think of it more like an Advil. And he tells her he's giving her a drug like that. She takes it, she crawls into bed, she goes to sleep, and Mrs. Driscoll passes away. Well, Mr. Driscoll also takes some morphine, and he expects that he is going to pass away, but there's a glitch. Mr. Driscoll has been taking morphine here and there. He's been trying to get his wife to take it, and she wouldn't, but he did. So because he has been taking it for a while, his tolerance has built up a little bit. So what killed Mrs. Driscoll isn't enough to kill him. And he actually takes morphine a few times. Well, he had decided that he didn't want their bodies just to lay there for days and days. And so he would, in fact, because he didn't want that, he wrote a couple of letters. He wrote a letter to her brother. He wrote a letter to a few of his friends. He wrote a letter to Professor Driscoll. He puts them in the mail just before he goes upstairs to give Mrs. Driscoll and himself those fatal doses of morphine. You all see where this is going? So they get the suicide notes and they rush to where his apartment is. And they get the gentleman downstairs showing the letter. They get the landlord, basically, to let them in. Well, the landlord lets them in. They rush in. This is a group of gentlemen. They've also, at this point, now picked up a physician on their way there. They get there, and they go into the first bedroom, and they find Mrs. Driscoll. And Mrs. Driscoll's been gone for about 36 hours. They realize that there's nothing they can do for her, and so they go farther back into the apartments, and there they find Mr. Driscoll, Professor Driscoll. Now, Professor Driscoll is still alive, but barely. He is sitting, as they describe it, straight upright in a seat. He is staring straight ahead, and his face is black. He's barely breathing, but he is alive. So they commenced to rubbing on him. That clearly was a treatment at that time. They rubbed on him. They got strong coffee. They poured that down him, and they began trying to bring him back to life. Well, they're able to bring him back to life. He comes around. He begins to tell them what I've just told you, that he didn't mean to do it, that, you know, it was just because life was so terrible and he had no hope and all of this, that he has done this horrible thing. And he confesses. And they send for a lawyer, one of his friends does, and his lawyer says, "Zip it, Skippy, stop talking." Well, some damage has already been done because he's already told them some things, but he does stop talking. They take him down to the county hospital now because he says that he did in fact kill his wife with morphine. He is now going to be put on trial for her murder. Trial does go on. He is acquitted of her murder, and he is acquitted on the basis of insanity or mental instability. Back then is really what they would have called it. But that's not the end of Professor Driscoll's story. So Professor Driscoll, he gets released. He's treated for his physical ailments. He's released. There's really no mental treatment at that time, guys. And he is put back into Nashville society. Well, now there's another problem, because he was already having issues with showing up and depression and feeling worthless. Well, now you all can all imagine back in 1800s, it was all about appearance and status and blah, blah, blah. Well, now he's lost the few friends he had. He's lost his money. His woman is gone. His sense of, you know, I'm sure for just like today, your significant other is a sense of comfort to you. He's lost her, and he continues to endeavor to find some work. He doesn't endeavor to work for himself, but he does try to work for someone else. He can't find a job, and we find his last days downtown Nashville. Now let's also talk about Mrs. Driscoll's family. Mrs. Driscoll, as I told you guys, had a brother. That brother is Mr. Montague. Yes, like the Montagues in Romeo and Juliet. So Mr. Montague actually owns a candy factory up in Waycross, Wisconsin. But they actually have the family burial ground over in Maryland, or at least that's what he tells the press, is that that's where the family burial ground is. I've searched for her grave. I can find her nowhere. And he tells the press that he's going to take his sister's body home, and he is going to take it to Maryland and bury it there very quietly, and he would really rather they just kind of butt out, which we could all kind of understand. Now, when we pick back up with Professor Driscoll, we find that he is living in the Cosmopolitan Hotel down on Church Street in downtown Nashville. Friends are gone, like we said. Professor Jennings hasn't abandoned him. He's lost most of his money, and he is now living in a room for rent. He no longer has his apartments. So, life's not good. So in January of 1900, he again decides he's had enough. And unfortunately, y'all, this time he in fact does manage to complete his task and take his life. That being said, it is Professor Jennings who actually does find him. Again, Professor Jennings is checking on him because he hasn't seen him in a few days. and they actually have to go and get someone again from the management to let him in the hotel, and they find him, and this time he is taking morphine yet again. He's curled up in his bed, and just like his wife, he's passed away. And so that's the sad tale of Professor Driscol. Now, Professor Driscol left his money and his will, and he said, left a note for Professor Jennings, and what he said was this: I don't want to be buried a pauper in a pauper's grave. Please take the money I have and bury me properly. Well, that's how we end up back here in Mount Olivet. Professor Driscol actually did engage with a local undertaker. And in the paper dated January 5th, 1900, we see that Professor Jennings says that he will, in fact, he has contracted, and that Professor Driscol will be buried here in Mount Olivet. Now, there are rich parts of Mount Olivet, and this background here will show you one of the less affluent parts of Mount Olivet. This area, especially down here, is an older section, but as you guys can see, those stones are a lot more modest. Now, I called Mount Olivet here and tried, because Professor Driscol actually has a Find a Grave page, excuse me, here in Mount Olivet. His wife has a page here in Mount Olivet. Now, I know that she's buried in Maryland or Wisconsin or wherever the family burial ground was, because I think her brother was really doing a bait and switch. When I called and I spelled it out for them, and asked them to go look it up, the people here at Mount Olivet Cemetery are super, super sweet. And if you can't find somebody, because there are only 45,000 people buried here, they are more than happy to tell you where your family or where the person you're looking is. When she came back on the line, she said she couldn't find anyone with that name, and he is in fact the only Driscol that's listed here, as far as I remember. And so his grave has been lost over time. I don't know if Professor Jennings just said that to throw the press off, and maybe he's buried in the Pauper's Field, which is over near the Tennessee Prison for Women, or if he is in fact buried here. I would like to believe that Professor Jennings did what was right and buried him here, and over time we've just lost his card and we've lost his stone. Or maybe he didn't have a stone, but maybe they just lost his card. But I did want to give you guys a view of this beautiful area. It's nice and quiet and peaceful here. And I certainly hope that Professor Driscol is resting in peace somewhere out here in amongst this beautiful, peaceful cemetery. So that being said, that is the story of Professor Driscol. I hope you guys have enjoyed this story, and I will talk to you guys soon. All right, bye.